Okay, so let me quickly put context. I think most of you already know this, so I'll be very quick. So the history of the town in general, because the schools are a reflection of that. Obviously, Mont Vernon was established as a little farming town. 1804, we got a squabble with Amherst over whose church is which, and we split off and stayed a farming town. And about 1820, 1830, 1840, the railroads were built, and people could suddenly go farm in Ohio and Indiana and still sell their produce on the East Coast. And they said, why am I farming in New England when I could farm in Ohio? And so they started leaving. And so the population of Mont Vernon, like many, many towns in New Hampshire, sort of peaked 1830, 1840, 1850, and started a slow decline after that as people moved. We bottomed out the 1930 census. We had fewer than 400 people in town. There's almost 2,500 now. And after World War II, really, it didn't really start picking up too much until after World War II, and subdivisions. Spring Hill, which was the first subdivision in town, was built in, I don't know, 60s, 70s, I forget when. Yeah, so that's when it started to come back. And we did not get back to our high population of the 1850s until, I believe, the 1970 census, either the 60 or the 70 census. So there's this, went up before the Civil War, started going down, 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 down through the Depression, and then went back up again. And one other thing to talk about in town history was our one industry during that time, which is the hotels. They started 1880s, 1890s. People would take the train from Boston or other parts of Worcester, other parts of Massachusetts. They take the train up to Milford and take the carriage up the hill and come up here and stay for most of the summer to get away from the heat of the cities, to get away from polio, to get away from all the things. So you have lots of, it was very common for families to come up here, stay for the summer, and the dad would stay working in Boston or whatever and come up on the weekends. That was a big industry. Started about 1880s, peaked around the turn of the century, started fading in the 1920s when the automobile was invented and people could go wherever they wanted. They didn't have to just go where the trains went. And a lot of summer hotels, boarding houses like ours died out. And by the time the Depression came, they were mostly empty, and they all burned down conveniently. So there isn't a single one left. The Grand on Grand Hill, of course, being the obvious example. So you have the local population that peaked and slowly went down, and you have the I don't know what you call it, the itinerant population, the summer people that started later, about 1880s. It peaked and went down. And the reason I point this out is because the very same thing happened with the public versus the private schools. So there's your overall context. So when we split off from Amherst, I got to say one thing. I mean, I'm not a professional historian, and I haven't, done staggering amounts of work. But trying to find out exactly where schools were back in the early 1800s and who had them is surprisingly difficult. So far as I can tell, in 1804, when we split off, there were really only two major grammar schools in Amherst, and one of them was up here in the Northwest Parish, which was us. When we split off, we established, as did most towns, the district schools, which is the your classic one-room schoolhouse. And the idea being basically that people couldn't travel every day to bring their kids to the center of town. So we had 5 of them, and I've already lost the map. There it is. I'm not sure how well you can see this. This is an 18 something on the map. So actually the roads are changed. We have the same map in the museum. All of you have been in the museum, I hope? Yes, Carl, you've probably seen the map. Okay, so there were 5 of them. There was the North School, which is Lamson and Crossroad. For some reason, it's not shown on this map. All the others are. There's SH, stands for schoolhouse. There was the East School, which was over on Tater Road. There was the West, which was way out, the Francistown Turnpike now. South Schoolhouse, which is on Old Milford Road, and the Center Schoolhouse, which was where the parking lot is for the fire station. Of all these, the only one that still stands is the South Schoolhouse, which is a private home occupied by those 2 people right there. Nice little house right on the street from me. It still kind of looks like a schoolhouse. You go by, it's really pretty.
With too badly. The original windows and roof lines.
Yeah. Yeah, it wasn't.
Have
not do chimneys? I think the
They took the front door out and put a chimney in,
Okay.
it's
and
had
all the
porch
windows
the
on
side.
the first floor front room originally.
And is there anything in there that you know, says schoolhouse, like, you know, an
We
old
have
black,
bell.
you have a bell,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
No blackboards on the walls or anything like that?
No, any
Okay.
slate. There's
Okay.
somebody bought an old slate sink and used it to make a pathway, but I found parts out back.
You
But
found parts of the desk.
Yeah,
and
personal
desk,
desk,
yeah,
okay.
I found some
All right.
desk.
Is that on Purgatory?
Old Milford Road, off Purgatory.
Okay.
Yeah,
As you go down the steep, you're on Purgatory, and there's Old Milford sort of plunges down this hill. It's on that road. So this is what it was. They were all one-room schoolhouses except for the center school, which had 2 rooms sometimes. Well, it certainly had 2 bathrooms at least, or two outhouses out back. But most of these were one-room schoolhouses. And judging from old town and school reports, delightful reading. If you're ever, you know, looking for something to wander through, go find the school reports from the 1880s. They were not the finest education. I mean, we look back on them fondly, but they were horrible, frankly, to be perfectly honest. So before I get into some of this, this one is a perfect example. So the school reports, they were in the back. And until 1919 was the first one, which was an actual superintendent. And before that, they tended to be written by the school members of the school committee, or maybe the principal, or maybe some random guy they grabbed on the street. I'm not sure, because they vary widely from year to year. Some of them don't tell you anything at all. Some of them, you're not even sure how many schools were open that year, but some of them do. And they all tend to be written in sort of this Dickensian language, like this one. In this plain, homely statement, which is only of interest to us, the people of Mont Vernon, we hope to kindle anew the personal concern of each individual in the future of our schools. Do not mistake this as being a flight of rhetoric merely to justify our existence as a school board. And it goes on and on and on, actually. But that's very typical. They're a riot. But they're also very critical. These one-room schoolhouses, they generally... the school year was 3 10-week sessions until, let's see, I don't think it was, they set up an actual school year until 1880s. So it was 3 10-week sessions. It was not unusual for a different teacher to teach each of the 10-week sessions because they paid almost nothing. And there was a requirement for a long time that you'd only be female teachers and only be unmarried. They're still pure, I guess, or something, I don't know. But and there was no housing for them, so they had to stay with local farmers, whoever wanted to put them up. And you know, so these eager girls would come. They'd go through the normal college in Keene, you know, teachers college. They come out here, think this would be awesome, and then after 10 weeks, they forget that. I'm leaving. So it was a problem. And let's see, 1875 school report. This is clear. There were 24 students in the fall and 34 during the winter. And one fact is worthy of mention. This comes from it. Every district has retained its teacher during the entire year. They were so excited about that they had to put it in the episode. So, all right. I've grabbed some stuff from the annual school reports. 1888. This is talking about a Miss Blanche Boubier who was teaching in the tiny East School. Quote, believing that the vividness of first impression is seldom diminished by change or age, and never fades from the human mind, she labored to secure the conditions necessary to thorough and successful work, the promotion of right habits. So that's what she did to students. The only early mention I could find of actual pay was $14 a week, which was back again in the 1880s. Really hard to put that in context, I don't know. Here's 1875. This is from the school report. It says, Mont Vernon is a farming town, and the farmers are sharp enough to procure the very best kind of plows, mowers, churns, milk cans, sewing machines, etc. We do not exercise the same prudence and foresight in relation to our school teachers. No one school yet owns a globe mural map, a geometrical solid, nor any other aid to the teachers. A few dollars judiciously extended will go far and be a permanent benefit. And that was very common, basically, then, perhaps as now. We didn't want to spend any money on education if we could possibly get away with it. In 1906, 1906, almost in World War I. It's not modern, but it's not, we're not talking Civil War anymore. The woeful lack of systematic grading is inexcusable, and the children are hurried through such pretense as there is, entering the high school irregularly and inadequately prepared. This is the fault of the natural guardians and the school boards, and directly traceable to that American disease, greed, called progress. And then 1919, which is the first report by an actual superintendent, the percentage of attendance is most discouraging for those who are trying to advance the children's education. Very few towns have such an extremely poor record. So we do. The number of tardiness is positively disgraceful. Anyway, and pretty much anytime there's anything written in the old town reports from somebody who's paying any attention at all, they talk about how we desperately need to consolidate schools. So these one-room schoolhouses were small. So this is a great picture. This is a picture of the South, the entire class for the South Schoolhouse in 1910. Again, 1910, not modern, but not incredibly long. And this is the whole school, and we have a trow, a trow, a trow, a trow, a Carleton, a Carleton, a Carleton, and one Hooper, and a dog. And this is quite common. That was the whole school, varied ages, and you can imagine that the education wasn't very impressive. This is the center school, which was the big one, as I said. So this is 1938 is the plan for center school. Just about the time it was torn down, actually, was done. There was still a woodshed, boys' toilet, girls' toilet, a sink, and there was a stone crock for drinking water because you brought your own paper cup. You can see this is the whole school. This is a photograph of the center school. This was the pride of the town. This is from speaking of Carleton, from Al Carleton. And so this, you can come up and see it, but this is the school. It's 2 doors. I don't know if one was for boys and one was for girls. Yeah, okay. And it was literally at the parking lot where by the fire station. It was sort of this end of it. In between, then it was the fire station, the old fire station, and then the town hall. And that was the center school. And then the desire was to get everybody in the center school. And the problem, of course, was transportation. Let's see. And right now we're talking about through about 6th grade. The question of what happened to older students, particularly back in the 1800s, is not always easy to find out. So some of them went to high school in Milford, what was in the Centennial School, or even before the Centennial School, the old school. The Centennial School, which is the Bales School, if you know Milford, the Bales building right off the Oval. That was the high school for a long time. Some of them went there. There was an Amherst High School. Some of them went there. Some of them, I've found occasional reports of students being tuitioned to Manchester. I've run across references actually of some, there were some years where some elementary school kids, and I assume like up out Beach Hill Road or out that way, that actually went to school in Wineboro. At Johnson Corner there was a school, and we would tuition there. So, and then some of them are tuitioned at the McCollom Institute, and I'll get to that in a minute. But again, sticking with the public schools, it wasn't until 1883 that the state required the school districts to actually buy textbooks. Before that, it was catch as catch can. In 1919, they established the first state aid for poorer school districts, and that 1919 is the year they established a full school year. So up until then, it was still. I'm not sure if the 310 weeks was every town or if it was like every town did whatever they wanted. In 1919, they also established, if there's any education folks that want to get into this, there's something called a supervisory union, the first time when they started trying to join people together so you could actually have semi-professional organization. We joined with Amherst, Brookline, and Milford, and in 1993, Hollis joined, and that lasted for 45 years. As I said, the population of the town was shrinking, so of course the population of schools was shrinking. And by 1922, they finally, because the number of students had fallen below 30, they finally consolidated all the schools into the center school. So up to then, there was I believe it was the East School was the last one. The one on Tater Street was the last one that was still operating. I'm not absolutely certain. But they went to the center school. And let's see, it was stayed there until 1947. So for 42 to 47, it was the only school in town. So Keith Pomeroy went to the center school. Did you go to center school, Al?
Yeah, I'll do, yeah.
Yeah. So what was it like? Do you want to tell us what the center school was like? You want to tell us what the center school was like?
I don't know what I had for breakfast. Now you want me to tell you. I was 65 years.
65 years? I went 65 years amongst friends. Come on.
In fact, my job was to bring the wood into the stove so we keep warm.
There you go. There you go. That's-
Viola Jenkins was the teacher,
Yeah.
and
It had electricity. It had electric lights. Yeah.
yes, I think we had electricity.
Yeah.
I'm not positive, but I remember Charlie Trow sat in front of me, and of course I was not such always a nice little boy like I should be, and for some reason he decided that he would punch me in the nose, right in the class, and I got up to get even with him, and the teacher said, "Sit down, Carleton, I'll take care of this," and she said to him, "You stay after school tonight." Well, I'll never forget this, because he said, "I can't. My mother's making my favorite stew for me, and I'm going home." And she said, "You stay after school, like I told you." Well, when the bell rang, he got up and he ran for his coat in the hall, and he got it about half on, and of course, I was interested to see what was going to happen. And the teacher buckled right on the back of his shoulders and pulled him back, and he wiggled a little bit, and the coat ripped, and he's down the road for home. And as he went out the door, he says, "You will buy me a new coat. That was my good coat, and my mother will make you buy me one." It was in rags to start with.
And this is.
I remember things like that.
And, Charlie Trow is in Trow Road. And Trow family, there still are obviously Trows in town. Oh, dude, was that a?
Yeah, I was just gonna contribute here.
Yeah.
Because I was talking to Keith, and he used to talk about going to the center school, and he told me that he used to ride the milk cart uptown in the morning, and he'd bring his sled with him, and in the afternoon they'd slide down the hill all the way down.
Wow.
Apparently it snowed a lot.
So that was it. That was the center school. It was closed in '47. It was sold and was moved to Pinkham Avenue. And I'm not quite sure whatever happened to it. Did it burn, fall down, or what?
It got torn down.
Got torn down? Okay. All right. And at that time, we moved to the McCollom Institute. But before I get, let's go to the McCollom Institute, which is sort of a parallel but separate entity. So the center school was built in 1848. And in 1853, the Appleton Academy trustees built the McCollom Building. And we have a photo of it. Oh, there it is. Appleton Academy right there, when it's still the Appleton Academy. So you see it hasn't changed a whole lot. I mean, it's had the porch put on front and whatnot. So this is the last half of the 19th century was when the private boarding schools in New England started to flourish. And there were lots of them around. And they all, wanted to become Phillips Exeter kind of thing. And that was sort of the model. And it's partly because public high school and public higher education was pretty iffy in the U.S. And so they built it both for day and boarding students. And they built it up here for the same reason that we had the boarding houses, is that, it was supposed to be healthier coming up here, and people could come from Boston on the train and get here reasonably easily. The name was changed to the McCollom Academy, later McCollom Institute. in 1871 because a guy named George McCollom, who lived in town, donated $10,000. Then, as now, you can a little bit of money will get your name on a building. Attendance peaked. It was boys only. Attendance peaked at 86, which isn't bad. In 1874, but slowly declined as what are known as country academies fell out of favor, and it went out of business and closed around 1900. I cannot find an actual statement of when it closed.
So is that a boarding school that, you know, non-residents were going to?
It's a boarding school for non-residents.
Okay.
Town also, and part of the reason I mentioned this, is the town also intermittently had contracts to send some of our students there on a tuition basis.
What
Day
what
students.
grades were in there?
It was the equivalent of middle and high school.
Okay.
If you can find that specifics, I'd be delighted to know. So it closed in 1901. The town, and for about 4 or 5 years, 1901, 1906, thereabouts, we ran it as our own high school. Mont Vernon only. Maybe some Lineborough kids came. I can't find very much out about it. Attendance was never more than 20, and it was closed because it cost way too much, of course. In 1906, Arthur Stearns, who was the headmaster of a school for boys in Lakewood, New Jersey, he agreed to establish a boarding school there for both sexes. I don't have any information about it. Did he buy it? Who owned it? I mean, I think it was still owned by the trustees, and I don't know if he just leased it or what. Anyway, so he opened it in that year, 1906, stopped accepting girls in 1910. I'm not sure why. I just
Didn't work out with girls.
so, and it did quite well. So the Stern School, as in this, was the best of the lot. It flourished. It had a pretty good reputation. We have up here, when you come up, here's and we have some more in the museum. So here's like a yearbook, and here's the brochure they have to peddle it to people. One of the interesting things you find looking through the yearbooks, and so all the young men are posing in their ties and having a poem for them usually. The student council and the winter sports teams and the like. And enrollment was only, if I recall in this one, let's see, 2, 5, 8, 11, 14, 17, 20, 26, so not many. In some years you'll find as many as a half a dozen people from China. So he obviously had some connection, whether mercenaries or somewhere over there were not mercenaries.
Missionaries?
Thank you, missionaries. Okay. And Freud just don't pay any attention to that. So they obviously had some connection. So you'll see that in some years, not all years. So, but it seemed to do quite well. They owned the house across the street. That one, which was a dorm. They owned obviously Stearns Pond, which was used for, I guess, I don't know, ice skating, hockey. They owned some other parcels in town, and it did pretty well. It lasted. Oh yeah. So I have some information that says it owned the golf course, which I'm not sure about. Yeah, I'm not certain that's right. The golf course, which is now next to where the post office is, I thought it was established for the hotel, but anyway, attendance did pretty well. Stock market crashed in 1929, really clobbered it, as well as frankly the change in people's habits as the automobile came along as well. So it closed in 1937. So once the stock market hit it went downhill fast.
What was the tuition?
A good question. I don't know. I'm not sure it's in any of our. I haven't written down. That's a good question. You will find some. We have in the museum. It's up on the wall. There was the Stern School. Or actually, back then that might have been when it was still McCollom Institute. And the hotels were the two big things in town. They were kind of different times of year to a certain extent, but they still apparently didn't get along. We have a wonderful complaint that was written to the cabinet, a letter written to the Milford cabinet from the owner of the Grand, complaining that students from the Institute had broken into the hotel over the winter and trashed it, and he had all these snide comments about the youth of today and all that. Anyway, all right. So the building shut, and as far as I can tell, it was pretty much unused for almost a decade until 1947, when the center school was closed, and the trustees of the McCollom voted to let the town use it. And at some point, obviously, we bought it. We own it now. I'm not absolutely certain whether they sold it then at the time, and what the sale was for. Have we found that, Doc?
I have the deed.
You have the deed. Okay, we're in the process of updating all the deeds in town, so somewhere anyone know. But anyway, so basically, all the district schools have finally closed right after the war. Center school, they thought maybe they'd get a school in which the students didn't have to bring in wood every day to heat it, perhaps. So the McCollom Building was empty. It's pretty obvious. Moved into that. And that was, anybody here attend school in the McCollom Building? Some people did, yeah, definitely. It was the school for a long time. It changed somewhat over time. Basically, usually it was grades 1 to 3 downstairs. I'm sorry, two ground floor classrooms. One was grades 1 to 3, one was grades 4 to 6, but that changed over time. Later, there were classrooms upstairs, right? Yeah. There was a gym upstairs. I got it here. A third classroom was built in 55. So before 55, there were just the 2 classrooms. And 55 is when the population started to rebound again. And upstairs was turned into classrooms in 1961. And we have not very much information really about it as a school. It's one of the things that, people just didn't keep much. This is the cover of the town report from 61, shows that at the time there were 3 classrooms. And Mont Vernon Village School was the name then. But the school population started to go up, and the building's kind of old, and there was lots of discussion in town about what to do. And finally bought some land on Harwood Road, and after a couple of years of it being turned down, the town finally agreed to build a new school. And it built what is now the village school. But actually, before that, anybody who attended class in the McCollom Building like to share? I love that, share. You want to say anything about it? I mean, what was it like? Was it like old, beat up, and ratty, or was it awesome?
Well, it was the late 70s, so that's certainly more recent than other generations.
Yeah.
The windows leaked air, the heating pipes creaked and cracked, it was the old tubes.
There were still inkwell holes in the desks.
Probably.
Yeah.
I remember. So when I was there, they had readiness in first grade on the first level. We didn't have town kindergarten, but they did have readiness. And then the second level was second and third, and then we went to the.
Oh, by then they'd already built. Okay.
Do you remember your teachers' names?
Oh yes. Mrs. Quinlan,
Mrs. Quinlan?
Yeah.
Oh, all right.
Well, and then once the village school, then I had Mrs. Curtis, Mrs. Dunn,
Awesome.
and Miss Druin, who is now still there, but she's Mrs. Boyd now.
Oh, cool.
So I had Mrs. Courage for first grade on the first floor.
Yep.
I had Miss Maga, who was a young teacher. My dad said she was not much taller than a second grader. And I can't remember the third grade teachers. I remember we had Mrs. Fight came in for art, because I loved art. She taught us art once a week. And I had Mr. Norris in 6th grade, Mrs. Robichaud in 5th grade, 4th grade, and Miss Turcott in 5th grade. Miss Turcott, I went to Hawaii every year.
I'm glad you've retained so much from your education. So the village school was built in 70 as just 4 rooms. This is the 1970 town report. This is the first year it was open, and one of those kids is Kirk Pomeroy, who's, Pomeroy and Kirk, who's in the Historical Society. And it was just 4 rooms, So they just had third through sixth up there. And it lasted that way until 1990. I didn't realize it was that late. All the classes moved to the village school. And the McCollom Building ended 137 years as a school. So during this time, so that's the McCollom. Let's go back to the public schools. So 1964, the supervisory union system ended, and they created what was then Milford Area School District, which lasted 35 years. The area is one of the legal designations in New Hampshire for the ways that multiple towns can join together on a school district. The other is a cooperative, which we have now with Souhegan. So under an area school district, the big difference as far as people are concerned is that Milford controlled it. So all the seats on the school board were Milfordians or whatever the word is, because they were so much bigger. So it was us and Milford and Amherst. Let's see, 88 is when things went to a head. Basically, Amherst was growing so much faster than Milford that was that I got something wrong expression? No, okay, good. All right. 88 was Amherst was going so much faster than Milford that it caught up. I have the population figure somewhere. When it was formed, Milford was like 3 to 4 times the size of Amherst, and we were always sort of just sort of afterthought. But by 88, Amherst had virtually the same population, and Amherst didn't really like the fact that they had no say. And there was a lot of discussion about whether they could change it to a cooperative school district in which you split up the members of the school board amongst the towns. But that didn't really work. And that's right when I moved to the state, I was working for the Nashville Telegraph, and there was just these endless stories about squabbling among school boards. And finally Amherst said, forget it, we're gonna go off on our own. And then the question was, what's Mont Vernon gonna do? We're gonna stay with Milford, where we've been sending our kids intermittently for a century, although they had also gone, Amherst had a high school of its own, at least before World War II, I'm not quite sure when it closed. So sometimes they'd gone down there. Or are we gonna go with Amherst? And if you listen to Bob Neighbors' interview, he talks about much of the discussion about what's a good idea, which one should we do. And so we decided to go with Amherst and set up the situation we have now, where we tuition kids to the middle school, and then we jointly own Souhegan with them under a cooperative. We have the charter yearbook from the school, and this is and they're pitching it. Or actually, after it had been approved, this was the floor plan, and here's the first set of teachers they had, and they were all excited for the high school, for the Souhegan High School. Yep. Yeah. It was, and it was fairly innovative at the time. Of course, the open, calling your teachers by the first name, that people have been fixated on for 20-something years. Yeah, I know. And and I think that was part of the reason that some people in town wanted to go with them, as they thought it'd be different. But
What year was that?
19. Let's see. We started 90. I'm sorry, 92.
So
92.
that's
The river. Just to the river. There was a lot of debate about that.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. It wasn't like, I remember about the same time Nashville built the new junior high school, and they ended up calling it Pennachuck. And there was considerable concern that that was a bad rhyme, and that junior high school. But they didn't have that problem with Souhegan. Was there some? Yeah.
I just wanted to mention, speaking of the name, I always thought it interesting they called it Souhegan, when a lot of the old timers used to say the Souhegan National Bank, the Souhegan River. But once we got that school name, that all of a sudden it was pronounced differently.
Really?
That's what I read.
Yeah.
that's what school will do to you.
One other small thing I forgot to mention was kindergarten. Somebody had mentioned it. Of course, we didn't have, New Hampshire was the last state in the country to require a public kindergarten. And we and Mont Vernon and a number of towns around here were amongst the last in the state to have had public kindergarten, so that my kids, and I assume a lot of kids here, went through the private kindergarten in the basement of the church.
Maybe I was the last class.
You were the last class? Aw. Well, I mean, public kindergarten is great, and I supported it, but I got to say the co-op kindergarten was awesome because one of the things, it was a co-op kindergarten, so the parents had to participate. And remember, you'd have your dad on. I'd be dad on to help with lunch and stuff. So I really got to know the kids in that kindergarten better than it was. It was variable from year to year depending on the teachers. They tended to turn over reasonably often, but it was a lot of fun. And not everybody in town went to it, but still, it was a little bit sad when it closed. But public kindergarten started in 2000. And that's when we built the addition. So since the village school was built, there have been 3 big additions. The first one that sort of put on all the back classrooms, the higher grades now. Actually, I haven't been in the school for a while. You have to go through metal detectors practically to get in anymore. So anyway, so I'm not quite sure. That was it, and then they built the multi-purpose room, and then they built the kindergarten. So those are 3. So the initial school is still sort of in the middle of it, but there. We had the thing that was driving all this was the population increase for a long time. So let me see. Hold on a second here. Let's see. So between the start of 1990 and 2001, the population increased from 200 elementary school population from 200 to 250. And do you remember I remember how excited everybody was the first year we had 2 teachers in all 6 grades. It's the first time we'd ever done that. And it stayed that way until about 2010, and it started to slip again as part of what's happening in the whole state, aging and smaller populations. We're down to, it was 178 pupils last year. I'm not quite sure what the figure is this year.
But they have 33 kids in kindergarten, so I
They do?
think it's
So
going back up.
maybe, yeah. It's hard to tell from one year, but that could be. It does seem like I've seen more kids, littler kids around town, which would be a nice thing. But it definitely had fallen by more than a third, which is one of the reasons why there's discussions about whether we should change the way we're organized and all that. So that is, let's see, what have I not touched on? Private school. The other thing, we also had another private school in town called the Crouch School, which, do you know what building it was in? You may know.
Yeah, it's right across from my old driveway, which was number 10.
Number 10.
Old Amherst Road.
Okay.
It's on Old Amherst Road. It's the house next to the little house that went with the McNamara house on the corner of Pinkham and Old Amherst. Am I being very helpful?
I love people that, so go to the house where the so-and-so lived 3 owners ago. Turn left where the tree used to be. There you are.
It's 2 houses down, including the little carriage house that goes with the house on the corner of Pinkham and Old Amherst Road.
So was your carriage house the school or the one with the front porch?
The one with the front porch.
Oh, okay, the Crouch is out.
So here's the one, we have there's not much about it. We have, and I'm not even quite sure when it opened and when it closed.
The Crouch sisters were in that house in the late 80s. It was on the market, we went and looked at it as a potential buy. And we went in there, and a lot of the rooms for the kids in the back, there were little tiny partitioned rooms. They looked pretty primitive to me. But there were 2 sisters that were still living in there. We decided there was way too much work that had to be done, so we didn't pursue it. But across the street where we did buy, there's a gazebo, a stone gazebo on the property. And Mr. Crouch evidently built that in 1947, I think I was told. And that was a place for boys who were having some issues, they needed some time out. They could go over there and be quiet. And evidently, I heard from Kathy McNamara told me not too long after we moved in, that there was a thatched roof on top, which was not there when we bought the property.
So I got the impression that the school was designed for boys, high school age boys who had not done well in other environments, to some extent. So, but not quite, but sort of. But I don't know much about it. But we have it's had its nice little emblem, and that kind of stuff. And it lasted for, I don't know, 5, 10, 15 years, not real long, but that was it.